My family invested in the 6 acres that is now Edible Acres back in 2008, and in the summer of 2009, early on in this project, things didn't look like this just yet. I was taking a walk out in the woods here, coming out towards this end, which is the west end, the west property boundary, which is along here. And off in the distance I heard a rumbling sound, kind of an interesting machine sound. And in the air I smelled a really strange chemical smell. And through the hedgerow I looked over and noticed if it weren't for the apple trees, I would have guessed it was a military exercise. So there's a fellow on a tractor wearing a gas mask, driving along, it's a little hard to see, and spraying his orchard, which is right over there. I didn't know that going into this. Before you get aghast of that, they're not any particularly different type of orchard. If you buy a conventional apple, most likely someone somewhere is on a tractor puttering along wearing a gas mask and spraying chemicals on the trees so that they don't have dots on them. It's Imidan and Captan were the chemicals, I later found out. The following spring, as spring thaw happened, which is happening now, which is inspiring this video, I noticed water from those fields coming in. Now back then, the water just diffusely poured right into our landscape. This is one of the high points of the property. They are upslope and upwind of us, which is a double whammy. Water was pouring diffusely in and pouring right into our landscape. Must have been for decades. So I spoke with the fellow and I asked, "Hey, you've got machines. Would you mind going along the hedgerow and maybe just digging a trench to absorb that excess water? Maybe send it northbound," which is generally we're on a northeast facing arc in this geographical area. It turns out there wasn't enough time on their end, so I grabbed a shovel and I began doing it on my end. And now, a number of years later, I'm going through and renovating, and it's a shame that it's still going on, but at least there's a system here that can absorb and redirect. I kind of call this a Tai Chi swale, in that the energetics of what's coming in from this very, very large field with a tremendous amount of water can be brought in, and with just a shovel, granted I took a ton of hours to do it, but the water from their field, as you can see, is coming right in here. So this is one of the high points in our watershed, and from here I have stewardship. We're over the property line by 2 feet. And so maybe one day we'll get a trench on that side dug by a machine to really do it. But for now, I'm renovating this trench so that right along our common property line, their water can come in, and instead of sheet flowing across and into our watershed, you'll notice that I have hand-dug ponds right there, 30 feet away. If the water flows right in, then those materials go directly into those ponds and ultimately into our crops. And I know this isn't the perfect solution in the long run, but it's what I can do, and maybe food for thought what you can do if you have up watershed some things that you don't love. But anyway, this trench is dug with a berm put down slope, and it follows along the property line, northbound. And even though the slope actually, the elevation goes up a little bit, the trench gets deeper. And so the water flows along. Periodically when I dig this out, I call it rainbow water. Little rainbows appear from all the beautiful, exciting, exotic debris in there. But it's clearing up very quickly. And there's opportunity here that as this water moves, where this berm is, I've planted comfrey every 6 inches. So there's a biological element that will shade the water, keep it cool, deposit organic matter, which will bring life to interact with whatever is in that water load during the summer. Just on the upslope side are nitrogen-fixing trees and shrubs. There's blue false indigo bush and red buds. You can't really see them now because it's all dormant, but I have grasses. So in other words, I have lots and lots of very fast-growing, well-adapted, toxic-tolerant perennials that are structurally going to aggregate and expand in here. So, for example, blue false indigo bush with a red bud right next to it. 8 inches apart. And all the while the water's flowing by with all these different living elements that can act on it, And by retrenching it, I'm making that water be a little bit more aggressive about heading this way. And so, normally with the swale, you want to absorb all the water. In this case, I want to allow the landscape to let it move through. And I took Tai Chi when I was in college, and this has the feeling of Tai Chi to me because water's a pretty potent force. And by digging this trench out, we're taking the energetics and the load of that. Bear with me. It's actually, believe it or not, I'm guessing you can believe it at this point, a fair bit of physical labor involved in doing this. But here we go along the property line. Again, you can see the living fence there. Now as we get to here, the slope changes and the water's actually drawing itself down more aggressively. The beauty part, even just running that course, all those subtle interactions and texture in the trench, it's not a tube, it's interacting with life and air and sun. By the time it gets here, it's already running clearer. Still interacting with lots of material, still staying just above our watershed and shunting back down. Now we've come over a little hump, still heading northbound. The orchard off to the side there. This is where it gets fun in my mind. From here, the trench goes into the hedgerow and back into their field. It bleeds over a little bit here, but I'm going to berm this up with way more soil. I'm actually planning to dig a pond somewhere in here to feed all non-edible, so I'll be doing willow and poplar and giant grasses in here for propagation. That soil will be used to berm this end to make sure the water goes back in. So the force of the water coming from their property comes in, it's redirected, has a chance to interact and be filtered a tremendous amount by non-edible plants and physical landscape, and then it's invited to go back into their land for them to have fun with. And you can see, again, the water by here. I'd almost be willing to let it into the landscape, but the really gnarly toxics, they're not going to show up in water like this. They're just in it. So I'm not sure what else to do, but it's something. And with a shovel and maybe 30 hours of labor, I'm able to send the water back from whence it came, hopefully a little bit better than I found it, but not having to deal with the entire brunt of it. Maybe someday they'll find a market for their apples in the cider industry where there's absolutely no need to spray them because the blemishes actually make the apples have more sugar and better tasting cider. But for now, the fresh market seems to demand an apple with no dots, and so my landscape has to absorb the brunt of that. So maybe part of the moral of this story, when you go to the supermarket, look for the apples that have the dots, that don't have the spray. There might be some tiny little permaculture farm just downslope, just downwind of someone who's using poison to make those apples look clean. Go for the blemished things in life. They're more beautiful anyway. So there you go. That's what was required to make this happen. So you can do this too if you've got some grimies upslope of you. This spring I plan on putting in a few more 100 trees. I even have a variety of bamboo that's proved to be very, very vigorous. That I'd be interested to see how much it enjoys the light in that field. Maybe I'll take on the burden of their spray and they can enjoy some really beautiful grasses. Thanks for watching.